Hey, welcome to Open Bible, Open Life. I'm Pastor Kyle, and today I'm joined by Nathan Milleson. Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so Nathan, I want to talk, before we dive into, we're going to talk about Community Day, community groups, discipleship, bunch of stuff that you and I are both passionate about. I want to hear a little bit about your story. So we have a residency here at Two Cities.
We do.
And we're going to have, actually, at the time this podcast comes out, we're going to have 14 brand new residents that are going to show up and serve our church and be prepared for a lifetime of ministry, we hope. What people don't know is that you were the first resident ever at Two Cities. So can you just talk to us about how did you get to, not just you were at our church with your wife, graduated from UNCW, came here. Courtney was, I believe, doing PA school.
Yep.
So you guys show up here, you're from this area.
Yeah.
How do you get from in our church to on our staff through the residency? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I went through undergrad at UNC Wilmington, and through those years, the Lord kind of I didn't know what I wanted to do when I went to college, but through those years, the Lord just through some influential and some key people, one of which was my community group leader at the time in college. Through those years, just my heart shifted in the direction of wanting to go into vocational ministry. And
shifted from what? Was it something else?
From unknown.
Okay.
Just psychology.
Yeah.
And then when I graduated, Courtney got into PA school, like you mentioned, here,
Yes.
and then that's what drew us to the area. And through the Gospel Coalition's church directory,
found
Two Cities Church.
I didn't even know that we were on that, but okay.
You are definitely on it. I think we still are. And found the church, and we got connected. And I remember some of the first weeks that we started coming around, you were throwing out Albert Mohler in the briefing, and then you would talk about things me and Courtney had conversations
Yes.
about that week, and just these are our people. And
Yes.
So
then how do you become a resident?
yeah. Honestly, just through getting to know you guys through Pastor Caleb as well, and we got a part, hopped into a group, but then also we're on the worship team,
Yes.
even from the beginning that we got here. And I remember it was January of 2020.
Come on.
You had called
Right before COVID.
And you were like, hey, we're thinking about starting a residency program. If that's something you'd be interested in. And I was like, absolutely.
Yes, yes.
The Lord had kept a lot of doors closed. Of course, providentially, it's because I think it was the right door that.
And you had already gone to
opened.
seminary.
Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, okay. So you come on our staff now. A couple other things, then we'll get into groups. So we know, you maybe more as the director of groups and discipleship, but many of us, people jump on this podcast, they look and they go, "I've seen that guy. I don't know where I've seen him." Tell us about playing drums, because I think of you as two main things: discipleship and drums. Okay. So you are an incredible drummer. You don't even know I was going to talk about this on this podcast, but I want to just for a minute, how did you get so good at drumming?
By spending a lot of years playing very badly. I started I remember it was in a jazz band in middle school, and percussion, and you got your bass drums and xylophones and all that. Just kind of spurred me on toward wanting to learn an actual drum set and how to play, and then played in churches. The first time I was at this little Methodist church growing up, and the first time they brought a drum kit out, it was
no way.
The world,
Were you one of the first to play on it?
No, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
definitely. But then through just opportunities of getting to play and to practice and fail all along the way,
Yes.
we finally got to Two Cities, and me and Courtney both, we had so many reps at playing.
Oh yeah.
Figuring things out on the fly when they go horribly wrong, and how do you press on and continue worshiping, and creating that environment where people can continue to worship even though you just lost your drumstick and you've got to scramble. It's
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, often I will be, in the front row, and we're in the middle of a song, and I know where we're going in the song. I know Firm Foundation or something, and I'm like, Nathan, I literally will have this thought sometimes. I'm like, Nathan is about to take us up the hill, man. And I'm like, I'm ready for you to just, because I don't understand how music works really, but I just know the drummer is, this is my layman's understanding, the drummer is taking us somewhere. I mean, the way that the song feels crescendo. Anyway, just thanks, man. You and Courtney have been just such a dynamic part of our church, and are such an important part of our Sunday experience. But we're not actually here to talk about the Sunday experience, except maybe Group Connect a little bit if we have a second. But I want to talk about groups. So you mentioned your background in groups. I want to hear about that for a second. So obviously it's a passion. We're not the only church. We're not the first church to do groups. You mentioned just in a second ago, I was my community group leader when I was in college.
Yeah.
Had a huge influence on me.
Yes.
Talk to me about the role of groups in your life. Like
Yeah.
in your Christian life growing up?
Yeah, the very first group that I was like meaningfully a part of was in college through a church. They had their college ministry, and that's where I got
Co-ed or
connected.
same gender?
Same gender.
Yep, those are very common in college.
And so I did that, and like it was just a formative time. And then, but I remember like I started to have questions as I started really digging into the scriptures for the first time in my life. And we talk about it as a group, of course. And then I remember like I would go to my community group leader. His name was Donnie. And I would just like ask him questions, and then it would result in us going and grabbing lunch or something in the middle of the week, and just like experiencing, or like that was the first time I was ever discipled.
Yes.
And experiencing that, and then learning, okay, what does it look like, and how can I go do that with other guys?
Yes.
Like that was what it was, and that's what it kicked off. The way it kicked off for me.
Yeah, I mean, very similar experience. I became a Christian at 16, and I've told our church about that a couple times. And a big part of that was my youth group, but my youth group also had community groups. Our youth group does group and gathering same night. The group I was a part of, the youth group I was part of, they did a Sunday night youth group, and then they would do groups on Wednesday nights. Anyway, but I can remember, I mean, I had my license. I was brand new, had my license, had an 11 o'clock curfew, whatever it was. Yeah. And I can remember groups started at 6:30 or 7, and I wasn't home until 11. These groups, they're just such, when you're young especially, you can go for a long time. I was talking to a couple in our church this week, and their son's at university in a different state. And I said, how's he doing? And the first thing they said is he's a part of an incredible community group. Yeah. He's part of a church there. And they were like, yeah, he started to be interested in this non-Christian girl, and we were so worried, and we didn't know what to say to him. And we said, will you talk to your community group leader about it? And they said he talked to his community group leader, and he decided he shouldn't date this girl.
Yeah,
I'm like, this is exactly what we're talking about, the power of groups.
Certainly.
Okay, so let's talk about our church. So a couple things that we say in our church that I say from the stage. I'm not the only one to say them. I'm not the first one to say them. And I want you to give me your version of these, okay? So we'll kind of like, here's a plumb line, and Nathan, you go with it, okay? Sure. So we say that we are a church of community groups, not a church with community groups. Just one word different. But what do we mean? How does that hit you? You interact every day with our groups. How would you explain that to somebody?
Yeah. One very small word, but a very big difference.
Yes.
In that when we think of for me, when I think of our community groups, I'm thinking of, in essence, our church as a whole.
Yes.
Like we don't have Two Cities Church and 20 different ministries, and by the way, tucked on the side, here's community groups.
Yes.
It's like community groups is our primary vehicle for majority of the things we're trying to do as a church.
Oh yeah.
And so then I always think of it, like when you go to like a restaurant, and you order your main dish, and they're like, what do you want for your side? And then you have to like sit there and scramble for a minute. And try and
where are
find
the sides?
like
Hold on.
down in the corner, subsection 3A. But it's like that's not where our community groups are. Our community groups are essentially is the piece of paper you're holding, and then what we do as a church is that's what we do in our community groups.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because at Kids Week, so I'm at Kids Week, and one of the nights. And I met two new families in our church that night at the school we were serving at. And one of the families, I talked to them. They've been coming around for a few months, and they hadn't been to our weekender yet or whatever. And they literally said, I said, oh, so you guys are we love this church. And they said, yeah, but like, we're not in a community group yet. And they literally said this. They go, this is how they described it to me. They said, we leave church and we feel like something's missing. And we feel like we want to talk about the sermon more, or we want to go deeper, or we want to know people in this church. And I'm like, you're like a walking billboard for what we're talking about.
You were describing.
Yeah, you were describing what and I told them, I'm like, I don't know if this is theologically correct, but this is what it feels like. I said our community groups are half our church. Like it's half the church experience. I mean, there's multiple things to do, but I'm just telling a person, if what they do is they come for an hour and a half, I think it's super important. I give my life, my teaching, preaching ministry, our worship, all we've talked about. But at the same time, if you don't have that group, and I've talked before about how at our size church, at any church over 150, 200, the worship gathering cannot be the main place and point of connection. It has to be a small group, a Sunday school, a serving team. It just has to be a smaller organism.
Certainly.
Yeah.
The church can't be an event only on the weekends.
Yes.
It's like, because then it's just an event.
Yes.
It's like the church is is a people. It's like that's what we see our community groups as.
Yeah. All right. Couple other plumb lines. Okay. We are needy and needed. How would you talk about how community groups kind of fit into this idea that we're needy and needed?
Yeah. So if I'm in a season where I'm walking through something particularly heavy, right? It's
Yeah.
like I'm in a season where I am definitely needy.
Yeah.
It's like I'm needed by other brothers and sisters in Christ
Yes.
to be able to walk through whatever it is I'm walking through.
Yes.
If I'm in a season where I am needed by somebody else,
Yeah.
so okay, I still have to go be in a part of a community group because there are going to be other people who need me to pour into them. And we do that. It's a two-way street.
Yes.
It's always a two-way street. We have something to offer other brothers and sisters in Christ here in our church, and then they are going to be the ones who are going to pour back into us.
Yes. Yes.
Maybe not even, I
No, I'm
probably
with
said,
you.
yeah, not even if we're in a season of walking through something in need of care. I think that's where my first inclination goes. But even broadly, like just to disciple one another,
Yes.
like to be in community. It's like we still need to be there for other people.
Yep, yep. You know, when I think about it, I think there's probably more options than this, but some people have the wrong community. They're heading in. The Proverbs warns of this. They're heading with the fools in the wrong direction.
Sure.
Other people, what's more common today is different forms. It doesn't always feel the same. Different forms of isolation.
Yeah.
This last week we're in Jonah chapter 2. Well, the interesting thing about the story of Jonah is I mean, there's only two guys named in the whole book, or two people: God, Jonah. Only people we get by name.
Yeah.
Jonah is basically alone the whole time. I mean, now God calls him to go out, but he's alone. But when he's got the pagan sailors, and he's alone in the belly of the whale. Then he'll be alone, but preaching to the Ninevites. Then he's alone with God at the end, and
That's right.
it's great to be alone with the Lord. But isolation is not a good thing. And
Right.
one of the things that Jonah doesn't have, it appears, is Christian community. We even see that when in the New Testament, when we get to Jesus' ministry and his sending out. He sends them out 2 by 2. Just even on mission, we want to be in community. So let's talk about community for just a little bit. Like I want for some of our listeners, they are not going to know anything. They're not in a community group. They've never experienced it.
Yeah.
Some people who are older in our church, if you're in your 60s and 70s, it feels sometimes strange. I'm going to go to someone's house. I'd rather just, can you give me a classroom and can we do a Sunday school? Why would I go to someone's house? So for some people, this is going to be, we're going to talk about community groups and they're going to not know anything. A lot of people, this might be just a reminder. Yeah. Like we're going to, hey, oh yeah, like that's why we do that, So let's talk at different levels. I'll ask different questions. We'll see where the conversation goes.
Sure.
Talk to me about like, what is the purpose of a community group? So someone's like, all right, I'm going to commit to coming for 2 hours every Tuesday night. Like, what do I hope happens in my life and the life of this group?
Yeah, in every community group, we use the language of ministry, mission, and mercy.
Yes.
Like, that is our vision for our community groups, right? We want to bring health to the community group itself, to the believers in that group, right? We're going to be built up together.
Yeah.
And then, we're inward focused, if you will. It's like we're meeting together and discipling one another and trying to make that happen, and then, Lord willing, and then ministry, breeds, if you will. Like the more we do ministry, it's like hopefully that will overflow and become an outward focus of mission and mercy. Where mission, we're uniquely trying to reach unbelievers. We're trying to share the hope of the gospel with the lost. Mm-hmm. And then mercy, we're trying to meet felt needs that people have. We're trying to bring help through our good deeds to who Jesus often called the least of these.
Yes.
So it's an inward, like we're trying to build each other up as disciples, but we of course are trying to go out and serve and be servants and witness to the lost and the needy.
No, I've been in a community group for the full 8 years that we've had this church. I've been in groups before that we were talking about in college and in high school. Group life is a great blessing, no question. We could talk about all the great things. There's a lot of hard things about being in a group. Let's talk about them. Like, what are, and I can mention some I'll let you start. But what are some of the barriers? What are some of the places of friction? What are the things that hinder people from getting in a group, staying in a group, enjoying their group? Like, let's talk about the pressure points of groups, and then let's just try to address them a little bit.
Yeah, one of the biggest ones I think that I just see, right?
Yeah.
I'm not in all 120 some of our community groups, but just looking from my perspective, and then also being leading one now for several years, is people's temptation to prioritize other events and other things, other relationships above the community group gathering each week.
Yep.
If you go 1 week and you're like, hey, like we're just not feeling up to it. Little, as you like to say, little Johnny.
Yeah.
Little Johnny's not feeling well, and so then all of a sudden it just means the whole family's out.
Yep.
rather than, hey, although little Johnny's sick, could one of us go to
Yes.
community group as a representation of our family?
I love that.
It's like that's almost, never the case, unfortunately. And then again, just the wear and tear of just our day-to-day lives. Like you see it in people. And instead of seeing community group as something that's going to be life-giving, that okay, we got to get up and go, but like it's going to be restorative and refreshing to us by the time we're done and we're on our way back home. Not being willing to get there is the biggest obstacle.
That's why, and again, I don't give the community groups talk. I know you do sometimes. Caleb does. It depends on who at the weekend are. But one of the things that I've often said is you have to fight for community, and you're going to have to. I genuinely think you're going to have to decide. Well, and we have the benefit and blessing of being a large church with lots of options now. So I mean, you would know this better than me, but most people could choose the night of the week for group. It's like, oh, Monday's better, Tuesday's better. Yeah. It's like, great, we got groups every night. So I think it's finding what night of the week could we say, so for example, make it real practical for us. Our family, we do Wednesday night community group. A lot of families with kids in the student ministry. This is a hack. Those of you listening, if you do Wednesday night community group, here's the beautiful thing. Then your daughter or your son or daughters and sons can go to student ministry. You can drop them off before group, pick them up after, and you can have an intersection, not addition, two things on one night. Right. So that's what we've done. But then I think you have to go, okay, well then also what's too far from my house? Because that's psychological and personal. Yeah. But I know if I choose a group that's 25 minutes away, I'm not going to go very often. It's going to be easier for me to make an excuse. Yeah. But then I honestly think there are some other pressure points that are super practical that people need to figure out. They need to figure out childcare. Yep. And we help subsidize that, and we can talk about that if we want to, but that's just, we're trying as a church put our money where our mouth is and say we value this. So we're willing to subsidize childcare and get creative with how it's done because we actually think it's super important. Because outside of that, our groups are free. In the sense of that's the big investment the church is going to make, saying, hey, because the hosts for free and the leaders lead for free. I mean, right. But we're saying we're willing to pay for the majority of your childcare to make sure you get there. We want you to have some skin in the game. You get it. So I think I think another big one is food. And again, we can have different thoughts on this and we can push back and forth. And I want to hear, I would say what changed our group, and this is just a subjective, arbitrary, personal story, but during COVID, that was a time where people were, I'm staying home, I'm not coming, or life, whatever. Right. In our community group at the time, Andy Jump, he just decided, guys, he's very generous. He and his wife. They just said, guys, you know what we're gonna do? I'm gonna buy dinner. I'm picking up Taco Mama. I'm picking up, Yamas. I'm picking up Viva Chicken. And basically, guys, it's $15 a person or it's $12 a person. And if you don't pay it, then I'll pay it. Anyway, he just wanted right. And I don't want to act like it's a magic bullet. I will say that was one of the most. It's so interesting how something so simple can change your group. But parents no longer, or people no longer worried. Our groups at 6:30. How am I going to get home and eat and get to group? And then what it did to our group was we can talk about this too, but we talk about the importance of men and women breaking out in groups and how important that is. For us, I know some groups do that in the middle of the group. Hey guys, that was a great conversation. Guys here, girls there. For us, I would say 95% of the time it happens at the beginning. Because just naturally, the guys will go eat with the guys, the girls will go eat with the girls. We'll be catching up on a couple different things. So I think you've got to figure that out. And then I think you got to figure out, your host family. They've got to be the right. The community leader is so important to the host family. And I want to just thank our host right now because I've been a host. I was a full-time host for six or 7 years. Now I split hosting with a couple other people. But the host family is, in my opinion, is very important because they create the environment of, get in here. You better bring your kids or don't you dare leave early, that kind of warm kind of environment. And then I think, and then I'll throw it back to you. I think it's so important to try. If you would ask me, I agree with everything you said, obviously, the three purposes of our groups, mercy, ministry, mission. I feel like the foundation of a group has to be friendship and fellowship in the sense of, I know you're not saying the opposite. I feel like if you can get that, and sometimes it takes 6 months of meals and some other special things we can talk about, but if you can get there, then everything else begins to feel normal and natural. The being needy and needed, the praying for one another, if we're friends, it's normal for me to ask, hey, are you sharing Christ with anyone far from you or far from God, close to you? If we're not friends, it feels like, what are you trying to do, dude? You trying to catch me doing something? No, dude, I'm not. I want to help you,
Yeah.
So do you see any other, that was a lot, but do you see any other pressure points as because you read a lot of evals, you talk to a lot of community group leaders, you're in the weeds.
Yeah, very much so. And it really is. It's like, well, I agree with you. I'll go back to that. Is to your point in growing in community first. It's like, and we call our groups community groups. So it's like we desire and we actually believe that, like, okay, discipleship happens in relationships.
There you go.
But that's also part of it too, because when every group meets, it's like we're pursuing community, discipleship, and care. And discipleship and care, like those are two sides of the same coin.
Yes.
And they happen both in the context of community. It's like if the community's not there and if it's not present, and it takes time to build, certainly, then discipleship and care just are going to be lacking.
Yeah.
Or it's going to take even longer to pursue those things together. Yeah. But some other practical, pressure points that leaders have, I think one of the biggest ones, besides, for lack of a better term, attendance, or just like how involved people are and committed they are to a community group. It's just that it's the willingness to contribute. It's like they may be there and they may, I'm going to be there and I'm going to make sure I'm going to do, I'll take all these steps until a certain point, until it affects more of my time or more of, time, talent, treasure, whatever it is, whatever it looks like for that group. Walking with those individuals and pursuing and pushing them towards their next steps.
Yes.
It's like, how do you do that when they don't want to take their next steps?
Yes.
It's like, okay, well, uniquely the leader, right? We're a type of shepherd. All of our leaders are types of shepherds for the people in our community groups. And if I've learned anything about sheep, it's like sheep are not ones to follow directions or want to be, and even know that they need to be shepherded. And so, like, how do you walk with them through that? So that's one of the biggest pressure points, and how we're trying to equip our leaders is to be long-suffering servants, like just like Jesus was. I mean, like, lest anyone think if they're currently a community group leader, or if there's anybody listening who wants to be a community group leader one day, that they imagine this like perfect group where everybody just is taking their next steps and it's glorious and it's such a breeze and a delight. I mean, gosh, even Jesus, I was reading in the Gospels the other day, and it's like just to hear Jesus in Matthew where it's like he's in the boat and he's asleep and they wake him up and they're like, we're dying. It's like, save us. Yeah. And he answers, he just looks at him. He's like, you have little faith, and like how many other examples of where he just like is watching and listening to his disciples. And he's like, do you guys still not understand?
Yes.
Like, do you still not get it? How long do I have to bear with you guys and stay with you? It's like, that's exactly what our community group leaders are walking through.
Yes.
The same things.
Yes. I mean, honestly, our community groups do. We can, let's double click on that. Shepherding, care. I love Pastor Jordan's definition of care, discipleship in the hard places. Mm-hmm. And, when we think about it, I mean, we do say that we're a church of community groups, and that it tends to be, another phrase I'll use is it's the primary point of connection and care. Mm-hmm. And so for us, a lot of times I've said that, if somebody calls our church office or sends a blanketed email to contact two cities, it's usually a sign they're not in a community group. Yeah. Because normally if something happens, the community group leader and that community group is the first line of defense. And I've really been amazed. You would know more stories than I do. I've been amazed at the amount of things a community group can handle. Yeah. Just whether, something as simple and easy as, okay, someone had a baby and meal train and follow up and, there's some complications. Mom's struggling to be mom. And whatever it is. Yes. We can help with all. Dad's struggling to be dad. Or they don't know when to go back to work. How long and that group just comes alongside them. Yeah. Talk about what are some of the key issues in groups that you see come up, if this makes sense, where groups shepherd people through? Like, what are some key shepherding issues that you think come up in groups?
I think some of that will, even to start on even the baseline, it's there was a famous pastor. How he came up with this number, I'm not exactly sure. But I've been in the church now, in the ministry for several years, is starting to see this really is true. Where he says about 80% of the things we walk through just on a day-to-day basis can be dealt with at the community group level.
Yes.
And that should even be an encouragement, as we're breaking out into groups of men and women in our community groups, to be able to share these things and to be transparent and vulnerable with one another. Because we can, in communities, we can deal with these things. And then some of the other sort of specifics, though, in terms of some of the things that community group members, right? It's just an average community group that they're walking through. And of course, it depends, age and stage. Like, okay, are there parents in the group, or is it just, some young pros? Is it empty nesters? Is it a combination, multi-generational kind of a group? One of the biggest things, though, I feel like is, and this may not even be like one of the things that like people would shepherd somebody through, but like knowing that we need to go to one another in order to be shepherded. It's like the biggest thing and the biggest obstacle is the willingness to be vulnerable and the willingness to share and to
for the couple to say our marriage isn't that great. Can you guys help us? Or the guy to say I'm struggling with some kind of sin and help me.
Certainly, yeah. Oh, so certainly any sin though, whether it be pornography with men or whether it be some type of desire ultimately for some sort of relationship, or whether it be, children or grandparents or some sort of familial struggle. I'm thinking of one example right now where, there's just family members in general. It's like unbelieving family members who, then enter sicknesses or marriage strife or whatever it is. Being able to walk with people through those things. And that's something I feel like, because we genuinely want every member of a community group to be equipped to help care for one another, with and for one another. We need to be doing that. But it's not going to happen, and we don't have the opportunity to even practice doing that if we're not bringing that level of authenticity about what's actually happening in our lives. It's like, man, my community group may not be able to do anything about this, but can I at least tell them about it?
Yeah.
Well, then, gosh, at the very least, we're going to begin praying for you and for whatever situation it is you're experiencing or being affected by. And so being able to do that, being able to be honest and open, and then just starting with where Scripture calls us to start.
Yeah.
It's like, can we continue to bear with one another? Can we continue to pray with and for one another? And on you could go.
Yeah. So let's talk a couple other practicals, and then we'll talk about leadership development. And how we get community group leaders started and in place and launch groups. Why do we do sermon-guided community groups? I mean, that's one of the things that we've started from the beginning. We've never changed. In other words, we don't do book studies. We don't do separate Bible studies on different books. Certainly people can do that kind of stuff in their DNA groups. But when it comes to community groups, we've said sermon-guided, sermon-driven. Why is that?
Yeah, one of the biggest reasons is to just create alignment and unity across our church. Again, our church is our community groups. Our community groups are the church. And so if we're all walking through, because we have so many, but you guys were doing it from even before I got here. It's like, that's what you guys decided to do. And I think that's great because, again, it creates unity across all the groups. That way, throughout the whole week to think about over 1,000 people, 1,500. Yeah. It's like walking through and opening up their Bibles to the same text again. Because my group meets on Thursdays, right? Or even, I used to lead a group that met on Tuesdays. And by Tuesday, even by the time it rolls around.
What was it about? Yeah, I preached it and I asked myself that sometimes.
That's right.
I'm like, it's humbling.
It's like, oh gosh, people forget so fast. But then okay, we're revisiting it. We're not jumping off to some other text and again, truly leaving that sermon or that text in, the rearview mirror. But how can we open it back up and pursue, maintain that tension of we want to seek the truth from the Scriptures, but also open Bible, but then the open life side as well, where it's like, how can we actually seek the application of this?
Yes.
And again, for all those thousands of people, or 1,000 plus, being able to try and live that out that week.
Yes.
Like, imagine all these people trying to live out, hey, I'm going to actually talk about, what it is, I'm an area of my life that I'm weak in.
Yes.
It's like, and sharing that with friends, families, coworkers, neighbors, all these things. So I feel like, because that, I always think of the movie scenes, it's like where there's this mountain of an army with horses, for example. It's like, you just feel it shake the ground before you see them, come over they crest the hill, right?
Yeah.
It's like, as opposed to oh, here's a couple horses coming over the hill, and you're like, it takes way longer to even see that they're even coming. It's like, that's the effect and the momentum that we want to create in our city.
Oh yeah, and especially as we start to do, which we've done in the past, something like the One Initiative, which we did, coming up on a year ago. But that was so powerful because we're all on an initiative together, and we're all following up on it. You said one of them that I would say, I kind of give two reasons on this. You hit one of them. You hit them together, but the words I would use would be alignment, that's everybody, like you said, everybody's in a group is talking about the exact same thing. A couple weeks ago, it's weaknesses, like you're saying. And at the same time, it's very application oriented. In other words, hey guys, and this is, again, I'm a Bible teacher. I believe we should know the whole Bible. It takes the whole Bible to make the whole Christian. I believe there's always more Bible we could know. I also believe that we know many people in two cities know enough Bible, know way more Bible than they're living, and know enough Bible to change their whole life if they'd apply it. Yeah. And so I think the application-oriented nature of our groups is very helpful. Also, I'll say on a real practical level, I don't know if I've ever talked about this, and I learned this from Larry Osborne, who really is one of the guys who started what he calls, what we do, the lecture lab model. Hey, there's a lecture, that's the sermon. There's a lab, that's the group. They're connected. One of the things he said, and I think this is true, is it makes it a lot easier for people to go to community group, especially men. Because, not to pick on the men, but men, well, no one likes to feel stupid, but men in general, if it's like, hey, I don't know, you're a new Christian, you're a young Christian, you're a nominal Christian, your wife's more spiritually mature than you, and I'm like, come to this community group, we're going to be talking about Ecclesiastes. You're like, no thanks. I don't know what that's about, and I don't want to sound stupid. Yeah. But if it's like, dude, were you here this weekend? We talked about Jonah chapter 1, and we talked about running from God, and I just want you to come and talk about what you thought about it. Yeah. And then if it's like, okay, I know that text. I saw that movie. I can give the movie review. I mean, that's and so I think we have seen an enormous amount of fruit from keeping things simple and streamlined like we have. And so talk to us about it. Even since you've taken over and really been in charge of groups and all this, where have our groups gone even in the last few years? We talk a lot about what's happened in our church. We're in a new building. We've grown, by... I can't even keep up with it. We've grown by 1,000 people over the last year-ish. Talk to me about our groups and where they were when you started and where they are now.
When I forget the exact amount when I started, but when I started, I remember specifically, I was the resident doing the groups track with Pastor Caleb, and we were walking through, getting new leaders started, for example, and it would be a big deal to have like, hey, we've got 5 new community groups starting, one of the 3 times a year that we launch groups. And, to see the fruit of casting vision for multiplication and praying for that for our church, right?
Yes.
Because for the longest season, like we were growing at a pace that far, at a pace that far, like just like... we didn't have enough groups to keep up.
I get it. No, that would be groups were a massive lid of our church for a season.
Yes. But now we're to the point where it's like, okay, like we're looking at 15 plus groups, new groups every time we're hitting one of these 3 launch points throughout the year. And I like when we have started, commissioning them up on stage and seeing them sent out. It's like, that creates such momentum, and like that's awesome to see. Yes. To see that like our church is like continuing to multiply. Because again, we're a church of community groups, and it's like we've got to be multiplying we've got to be multiplying new leaders to make room for new people.
Yes.
So that's what's been so special about our community groups. We're still doing ministry, we're still doing mercy, we're still doing mission. I mean, we've honed in and refined on like how we want to pursue these things, but that's still there. But now it's just like we are at a point too, by God's grace, where it's like we're seeing people step up and step into these leadership positions where they can lead in our church, and that's what's so cool to see. It's just like as people come in, you see the amount of people we have coming through weekenders, which is like astounds me every time, and it's like, oh, we've got a place for you.
Yes. So talk about how many groups, if you know off the top of your head, how many groups. This is before we're filming this. Before we're going to launch a new Group Connect at the end of August. But right now, how many groups do we have?
Right now, we've got 102, and then if we fast forward to after the Group Connect, then we'll be sitting right around 120.
120 groups. Average group has roughly how many people in it? If you had to guess, 15 to 20.
Yeah,
15 to 20 people. How do we find these community group leaders? Talk to us about that, because that's obviously. I mean, some of our staff, like you, lead a community group, but some of our elders lead community groups, all that kind of stuff. But in general, we're just talking about, I mean, it's in the best sense of the word, normal, average, everyday members of two cities over time end up leading these groups. And that's the only way you can have 120 groups plus 120 hosts, usually, plus apprentices. So talk to us just for a little bit on like, how does somebody go from being in a group, so that was the first part of this conversation today, to, man, maybe God might be calling me over the next, make this up, 6 months to 18 months. The church is growing. I could see God using me and my wife to lead a group or something like that. What's that process like?
Yeah, all of our community group leaders start by just being good and modeled members of a community group.
Yeah.
It's like they are leading without the title. That's who all of our future community group leaders are. It's like they're in groups right now, and they are just being good group members. Hopefully, increasingly so. Hopefully, they're all taking their next steps and saying, "How can I take ownership of this group? How can I be leading and coming alongside of our community group leader in such a way where it's." If, imagine, right, in your community group, if someone said, oh, Bob is excited because, in 6 months, he's going to go launch a community group. The whole entire community group should say, yes.
Yes.
I know he has already been leading in our group.
Yes.
It shouldn't be a surprise, or no one should be skeptical that Bob wants to go lead a community group.
Yeah, that's good.
So they're good. They're good.
No
members.
one should go, oh no, I'm not. Yeah.
But and then too, like all of our community group leaders, they know our heart and our vision for multiplication, and they've always got their eyes peeled for it's just who's in their group,
who's it, who can we
who do you
raise
see
up?
the potential in? And it's like how can you encourage them to take their next steps? And oftentimes it's just that. Even if somebody doesn't say, "Hey, the next thing up for me is leading a community group,"
Yes.
because that can be intimidating for people for various reasons.
Yes.
But if someone says, "Hey," if someone says to Bob, for example, we'll pick on Bob today, Bob, can you lead our discussion night? Or God, can you lead our discussion time or our breakout time for the guys tonight? It's like just those little opportunities to have people step in and take their own steps in personal leadership and development in. That can also be the thing that over time just creates the desire to lead a group even.
Yes. Let's talk about a couple other plumb lines with our groups. I kind of want to hit the gamut today. Another thing we'll say here is we start new groups for new people.
Yep.
Talk to me about that. Why do we start new groups for new people versus just put people in old groups?
Well, those groups would be humongous.
That's one reason. They would be really yes.
Yeah. But also another thing is so with the new groups, because every now and then, and this isn't a big issue or problem or anything, but say there's an existing community group, and this happens all the time. But like we'll get people connected who say, hey, we had a couple leave and we've got some open space in our group. It's like okay, we'll get somebody connected to that group and. Maybe compared to a brand new group that's starting that has zero pre-existing relationships as a part of it, it's like, okay, someone's stepping into, if they're going into an existing group, it could potentially be take a little bit longer to develop a sense of, community with that group.
Yes.
Because they're entering this group where they're already going. And it's like, okay, we're just playing catch up as to, the dynamic here and the personality, if you will, of that group. But new groups also provide a space again for them to be able to step in at a point where they are taking ownership as well. Where it's like they can step in and feel like, okay, we're all on the same like starting point, if you will, in terms of the group itself. And so for them being able to feel like they've got if they've got a good grasp on what their part is to play in that group.
Yeah. And I don't know if I've said this one as much publicly, if you're familiar with this line that I've used in the past for groups, but we don't multiply groups as much as we multiply leaders. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that, and this might be one of the good places to close for the day, is I think what people feel like a lot of times, and I'm sympathetic to this, is people will feel like, man, I love my group. And I am, I'm making something up, but man, the 14 of us or 15 of us, we've been together for 2 years. It took me a long time to find a group that was a fit for me. My kids love this group, or our kids are friends and we're growing up together, and all those tensions.
Yeah.
And there's the tension between, should we just all stay? I can think of a couple groups as in my mind when this has come up. Should we all just stay here and be in this group and have that kind of cool experience of like, man, we've been in the same group for 15 years together. This is awesome.
Yeah.
And then, or do we go out? And I think, and you can correct me because you're more into this than I am daily. I think the best answer to that is that God has to raise up leaders to leave the group. Versus, I don't want people to think what we're trying to do with these groups is we're trying to split them every year. We're, okay, guys, I hope you all had fun together. 6 of you over here and 7 of you over here versus, man, is God raising up and putting, this is what I see in the New Testament. God puts on people's hearts, it's time to go to a new place and start a new thing. Yeah. And I think the best examples I've seen when I think of things is when, I don't want to pigeonhole us into something, but when I see a good group, let's say of 15, 17 people, where there's two couples in the group and one says, I think we could be the leaders. And the other couple says, and I think we could be the host. And we've had such a great experience in this group together. We want to create that for somebody else, but we also kind of have some of our groups still with us. And then the group that they leave goes, well, for right now, it's mostly the same. Maybe we'll have somebody else come in here. Maybe we'll raise up a new apprentice. Do you agree with that model, or what do you? How do you see groups multiply best? I'm trying to talk about that tension that I think people, because I know from the staff side we're like, we want to see more groups, and everybody does. But I know internally when someone's in a group, they're like, well, but I love my group and I don't want to leave. Yeah. How do we navigate that?
Yeah, that's a huge tension because it's do we want, what are we pitting against each other? We're pitting against one another, the nature of Christ and His kingdom, or are we trying to protect our kingdom and our own comforts? It's like, are we going to value multiplication and mission above making room for new people? Or are we going to value our relationships that we have and the comfort we have there over these things? Yes. But I always love to ask people with community groups, it's if someone's not willing or wanting to step out of their current group, which we want to launch leaders out to start new groups. That way the community group itself that they launch out of, they just continue on, exactly like you said. It's like, you're going to see somebody step out of your community group. It's like they'll still be in the life of our church. You'll still see them around. It's like, gosh, you guys can still team up and do things together as community groups. So that aspect of it is there as well. But one thing I love to ask people is like, okay, how did you get into a community group?
Yes.
Somebody had to leave and start a group so that you could get into one.
Yes.
And that's just the cyclical nature of it.
Well, you think about it, the way that community groups start, grow, expand, multiply are the same way it happens with churches. It's the same experience a church has when it says, let's plant.
Yeah.
Or let's start a campus. And then you got to go, oh, dude, 50, 75 people are going to leave. Some of them my friends, some of them the best servers in the whatever. And they leave, but it's best. It's best. And so, okay, as we close, tell us about Group Connect. It's coming up August 25th. Mm-hmm. Just tell us what to expect. I know we've got to go through a weekender to get in a group, but if we've done that, what should we be expecting on August 25th?
Yeah, August 25th, we're going to launch, Lord willing, about 18 new groups, and so that's where we'll have them on stage. We'll commission them, we'll pray for them, and then as soon as they say, Two Cities Church, you are sent, after each of those 3 services, we'll come down here to the multipurpose room, the flex room as we call it, and that's where we're going to have all of these leaders present and available for people, again, like, okay, if they've been through the weekender, and they're not currently in a group or haven't been a part of one for a little while, it's like, come and get connected. It's like, this is where it's so much more personable, of course, than going online and trying to find a group, because you're going to get to see and talk to these. Who are these
couples? What do they look like? What do they? What are their passions? Do I feel like I relate to them? Who else? Yeah, all of that. Yeah. So, well, Nathan, thank you. Thanks, man, in the midst of overseeing all these groups, investing in them, raising up the next generation of apprentices and community group leaders. There's so much we didn't get to. We didn't talk about community group syncs and the way we develop our community leaders. We didn't talk about our coaching system. So we're going to have you on again at some point. But thank you for being here. And if you're watching or listening online and you're a part of Two Cities Church, we want you to get in a group, and you got to go through the weekender. Our weekender is going to be August 23rd and 24th. And then right after that, we've got Group Connect on August 25th. And we hope that you'll experience what we've experienced, which is the power that comes from living in Christian community. Until next time, I'm Kyle Mercer, and I'll see you later on Open Bible, Open Life.